The Italian conquest of British Somaliland was a military campaign in the Horn of Africa, which took place in August 1940 between forces of Italy and those of several British Commonwealth countries. The expedition formed part of the East African Campaign. Background: when Italy declared war on 10 June 1940, the Italian troops were not prepared for a prolonged war in North Africa or East Africa. As a consequence, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini ordered only some limited aggressive actions to capture territory along the borders of Egypt, Kenya, and Sudan. Later in June, Amadeo, Duke of Aosta, the Governor-General and Viceroy of Italian East Africa, convinced the Italian Supreme Command to plan a campaign to conquer British Somaliland. The King of Italy, Victor Emmanuel III, and Mussolini agreed with the Duke of Aosta, and by the beginning of August the campaign was ready to commence. Order of battle: the Italian force attacking British Somaliland in August 1940 was commanded by Lieutenant General Guglielmo Nasi, general officer commanding Eastern Sector. The force included 23 colonial battalions of regular native troops in 5 brigades, 3 black shirt battalions, and 3 bands of Dubats and other locally recruited irregulars. The Italians also had armored vehicles, artillery, and, most importantly, superior air support. The Italian troops numbered about 24,000. On Italy's declaration of war in June 1940, the British forces in British Somaliland were placed under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Reginald Chaytor, the commander of the Somaliland Camel Corps. At the start of August, the newly promoted Brigadier Chaytor commanded a contingent of about 4,000 soldiers comprising the lightly armed Somaliland Camel Corps, the 2nd Battalion King's African Rifles, the 1st Battalion Northern Rhodesian Regiment, the 15th Punjab Regiment, and 1st East African Light Battery Howitzers. They were joined from Aden on 7 August by the 2nd Punjab Regiment and 8 August by 2nd Battalion Black Watch. Chaytor's force was not only critically short of artillery, it had neither tanks nor armored cars nor any anti-tank weapons to oppose the Italian medium and light tanks. Initial offensive: in the early hours of 3 August 1940, the Italian army crossed the border between Italian East Africa and British Somaliland. Because of the rugged hills, which run parallel to the coast some 50 miles inland, there were 3 approaches to Berbera, the capital of British Somaliland and the only port of consequence, which would support the passage of wheeled and tracked vehicles. The most direct route with the widest pass was via Hargeisa. As a consequence, the Italians advanced with 3 columns along these 3 routes. The western column advanced toward the small port of Zila near the border with French Somaliland, the center column toward Hargeisa and Adadlik, and the eastern column toward Odwina and Burao. The Italian plan was for the western column to seal off French Somaliland and then send light forces eastwards. The central column would establish a base at Hargeisa and then carry the main weight of the attack through the Murgo Pass towards Berbera. The eastern column would move to Odwina to cover the central column's flank and be prepared to link up with it if necessary. On 5 August, the port of Zila was occupied by the Italian Western Column commanded by Lieutenant General Bertoldi. Any possibility of help from French Somaliland for the British was eliminated. As planned, small forces then proceeded southeast along the coast and occupied the village of Bulha. The Italian Central Column, commanded by Lt. Gen. Carlo de Simone, faced more difficulties because of the mountainous terrain through which it advanced. The column was held up at Hargeisa by the Camel Corps assisted by a company of the Northern Rhodesia Regiment. But de Simone brought up some light tanks, and by 5 August the opposing troops had fallen back. De Simone took 2 days to reorganize his supply position at Hargeisa and then resumed his advance through the Karam Pass toward the Tug Organ, a dry sandy river bed, in the Assa Hills. The Eastern Column, under Brigadier General Bertello and comprising mainly irregular troops, reached Odwina on 6 August and then headed northwest toward Aotearoa village on the Tug Organ. Brig. Chaytor used his Camel Corps supplemented by small patrols of the Ilalos to skirmish with and screen against the advancing Italians as the other British and Commonwealth forces pulled back towards Tug Organ. Battle of Tug Organ. By the 10th of August, Simone had closed up on the British positions behind the Tug Organ and made his preparations to attack. On 7 to 8 August, the British and Commonwealth forces in British Somaliland had received reinforcements with the arrival of the 2nd Punjab Regiment and the 2nd Battalion Black Watch. General Archibald Wavell, Commander-in-Chief Middle East Command in Cairo, had also ordered a further battalion of infantry and more artillery to Berbera, but these reinforcements did not arrive in time. He also considered it appropriate to appoint a major general to command this expanding force, and on the 11th of August, a new commander, Major General Reid Godwin Austen, reached Berbera. The defensive positions of the British Army were centered around 6 hills overlooking the only road toward Berbera. On the 11th of August, one of de Simon's brigades attacked the hill defended by a company of the 3rd Battalion 15th Punjab Regiment and captured it, taking heavy casualties. The British launched 2 unsuccessful counterattacks but fought off Italian attacks on 2 other hills. The next day, all the British positions were attacked. By evening, Mill Hill had been taken from the Northern Rhodesian Regiment after severe fighting. More critically, 2 of the scarce East African light battery howitzers were lost and Italian forces had established themselves in the Assa Hills, dominating the southern side of the gap through which the road to Berbera ran. On 13–14 August, no further positions were taken despite heavy fighting, but the Italians continued to improve their position through infiltration. By the 14th of August, the defenders' situation started to look critical. The Italians were almost in a position to cut the road and thus the defenders' only line of supply and retreat. On the 14th of August, Godwin Austen informed Middle East Command of the situation, concluding that further resistance at Tug Organ would be futile and likely to result in the loss of the whole force. He believed that a withdrawal would result in 70% of the force being saved. On the 15th of August, he received orders to withdraw his forces from British Somaliland. Late on the 15th of August, the Italians took Observation Hill and after dark the defenders of Tug Organ commenced their withdrawal. The Black Watch, together with 2 companies of the 2nd Car and elements of 2nd Punjab Regiment, formed a rearguard position at Evacuation on the Berbera Road, some 10 miles behind the Tug Organ position. British evacuation from Berbera. While the British made their retreat to Berbera, the Royal Navy had constructed an all-tide jetty and had commenced evacuating civilian and administrative officials. On the 16th of August, the British started to embark troops onto the waiting ships. Repeated Italian aerial assaults were made on British vessels in the Gulf of Aden and Berbera, beginning on the 8th of August to little effect. HMAS Hobart was slightly damaged in 2 of these attacks, and the auxiliary vessel Chuck Dinner was hit by splinters in 1. On the 17th of August, an Italian column was reported at Bulhar, some 40 miles west of Berbera. The light cruiser HMS Series, patrolling off the coast, engaged the column and halted it. De Simon's forces advancing from Tug Organ were very cautious and did not attack the Barcasan rearguard until late morning on the 17th of August, when they were held by determined resistance, including a fierce bayonet charge by the Black Watch. After dark, the rearguard was withdrawn to Berbera. The entire British Commonwealth contingent withdrew to Berbera with minimal losses, and loading of the ships was completed in the early hours of 18 August. Although HMAS Hobart, with the force headquarters aboard, remained at Berbera to collect stragglers and continue the destruction of vehicles, fuel and stores until the morning of the 19th of August before sailing for Aden. 3 Australians from HMAS Hobart missing fear-jed were to become the first Australian prisoners of war. In total, 7,000 people, including civilians, were evacuated. The local Somalis of the Somaliland Camel Corps had been given the choice of evacuation or disbandment, and the large majority chose to remain and were allowed to retain their arms. Among the losses in the embarkation was the Tug Queen, the only British ship lost in the operation. The British defenders had little interference in this operation. It is possible that this was because on the 15th of August, the Duke of Gloucester had ordered Gen. Nassi to allow the British to evacuate without too much fighting. On the 19th of August, the Italians took control of Berbera and then moved down the coast to complete their conquest of British Somaliland. The British colony was annexed by Mussolini to the Italian Empire, as a part of Italian East Africa. Casualties. According to the Italian official history, published in 1952, during the campaign to conquer British Somaliland, the casualties were 250 for the British Army and 205 for the Italian. British aircrew losses were 12 killed and 3 wounded. However, according to the British official history of the Second World War published in 1954, total British casualties were 260 and Italian losses were estimated at 2,052. A more recent Italian assessment by Andrea Molinari published in 2007 gave total Italian casualties as 1995. The brunt of the Italian losses were suffered by their Ascari colonial troops. Only 161 of the casualties were Italians. Unofficially, the Simone estimated that nearly 1,000 irregular Somalis fighting against the Italian invasion were casualties during the campaign. These armed men operated as local band, with only minimal control from British officers. Lieutenant General Luigi Frisci, commander of the Italian East Africa Northern Sector, also referred to these 1,000 casualties in his writings, and believed that the Somalis fighting as armed bands on the Italian side suffered 2,000 casualties. Aftermath. According to De Simone, the Italian troops captured a considerable amount of British military equipment. He reported the capture of 5 artillery pieces, 5 mortars, more than 100 trucks, 3 armoured carriers, 30 anti-tank guns, 71 machine guns, and a large number of small arms and ammunition. The port of Berbera was used by the Italian submarines of the Red Sea Flotilla as a small base in the last months of 1940. The British Prime Minister criticised Gen. Wavell concerning the loss of British Somaliland. It was Wavell's Middle East Command which was responsible for the loss of the colony. Because of the low casualty rate, Churchill fretted that the colony had been abandoned without enough of a fight and proposed a court of inquiry. In response to this criticism, Wavell claimed that Somaliland was a textbook withdrawal in the face of superior numbers. He pointed out to Churchill that a bloody butcher's bill is not the sign of a good tactician. According to Churchill's staff, Wavell's retort moved Churchill to greater fury than they had ever seen before, and probably marked the start of the decline of Wavell's position with Churchill that led to his dismissal. British Somaliland remained part of Italian East Africa for a matter of months. On 16 March 1941, the British executed Operation Appearance, which was staged from Aden. 2 battalions from the Indian Army and 1 Somali commando detachment were landed on both sides of Berbera. The 2 Sikh battalions made the first successful Allied landing on an enemy-held beach during World War II. Shortly afterwards, the British and Indians recaptured the whole of British Somaliland from its Italian occupiers. One important consequence was stated by Time magazine. The Britain's greatest loss was in prestige, especially among Arabs. Observations. The campaign in Somaliland was like most of the others of the Axis. It initially started with a victory, then after a period of time, finished with a complete defeat. But in the specific case of the Italian conquest of British Somaliland, the defeat was followed by nearly 2 years of Italian guerrilla warfare. Other observations are The invasion of British Somaliland showed that Italian forces could coordinate columns separated by many miles of desert. British forces showed good discipline in the retreat and were able to salvage most of their forces. The invasion of British Somaliland was the first campaign the Italians won in World War II. British Somaliland was the first British colony to fall to enemy forces in World War II. After the first months of the war were over, Mussolini boasted that Italy had conquered a territory the size of England in the Horn of Africa. The campaign of British Somaliland in August 1940 was the only one in which the British Army could not get strong support from the Royal Air Force, showing the importance of the air forces in the Allies' victories.